Well, the Justice Department is releasing a scathing new report accusing the Minneapolis Police Department of a pattern of racial discrimination and violating constitutional rights. The findings coming from a years-long investigation sparked by the brutal police killing of George Floyd back in 2020. Well, Floyd's death and the outrage that followed prompted that wave of protests across the nation, and it fueled the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, Attorney General Merrick Garland actually outlined the report in damning detail, saying Minneapolis police officers often unnecessarily used excessive and deadly force. At one point, even providing an example of an officer shooting and killing of a woman in 2017 after saying that she, quote, spooked him. And it's that culture within the department that Garland says led to the killing of George Floyd.
The patterns and practices we observed made what happened to George Floyd possible. As one city leader told us, quote, these systemic issues didn't just occur on May 25th, 2020. There were instances like that that were being reported by the community long before that.
So Garland says at times officers that were reported for racist conduct or remarks were not even held accountable until there was public outcry. The city of Minneapolis and the police department have agreed to a series of reforms now that will be overseen by an independent monitor. Joining me now to discuss, ABC News Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas. He's there in Minneapolis. Also, Mark Claxton, former NYPD detective, joining me once again. So, Pierre, what else have we learned from this report? I mean, you're there.
Well, I think the dominant thing that we learned today, and I should first say one of the more poignant moments of the press conference was when the Attorney General looked at the camera and said, George Floyd should be alive today. And I think the overlying backdrop of the story is that George Floyd's death was symbolic, a symptom, if you will, of a broader disease affecting this community. And that is largely a police department which treated black and brown people and Native Americans differently, and often, as you mentioned, used excessive force. Kira, what this boils down to is how black and brown people live their lives in this city. One statistic that jumped out at me today was this notion that black people were 6 times more likely to be pulled over than their white counterparts, much more likely to face excessive force. So this is a story about how people of color live their lives and what their interactions were with police on a daily basis.
So, Mark, were you surprised by the findings?
Not surprised at all. I think there are many people throughout the country who are not surprised, especially in the black and brown communities. As a matter of fact, I think many of the conclusions in the report could have been easily predicted by several communities across the nation in regards to their police departments. So we're dealing with a systemic issue. We're dealing with issues that really impact the entire law enforcement community from one end of the country to the other. And we're dealing with a systemic problem, a historic problem of race-based policing, racial insensitivity, outright racism, bigotry, ignorance, and the stubbornness that supports it, which is the toxic police culture.
So, Mark, earlier we actually heard from families who say they were impacted by the police misconduct in Minneapolis that we just heard about over the years, as well as local Black Lives Matter leader. Let's go ahead and take a listen. I'll get your response.
I'm also a native black Minnesotan from St. Paul, and we remember the days where the police will take you down to the Mississippi River at night and point guns at you and beat you and sometimes beat people to death. The DOJ, Merrick Garland, should begin a nationwide consent decree on policing in the United States of America because it is an emergency.
Mark, what needs to happen now?
I think we need to examine whether or not, and let me just start by saying I think this report is very significant. It was necessary. It's important. It's very thorough, apparently, and it really hits at what makes us ill in this country. But we need to also examine whether or not there needs to be another way to address and handle these issues, and whether or not the DOJ's civil rights investigations are sufficient, whether they're efficient, and whether it should take 2 years or in excess of 2 years for conclusions, and whether or not there is a will and a desire for improving or shifting away from the current policing model more towards a public safety model. These type of incidents have occurred. What happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis has occurred to several people. Some of the names are well known throughout the country for many years, and nothing short of a revolutionary shift away from policing into a more public safety model is going to present some significant improvements.
And Pierre, how do you think this agreement will be enforced? And how do you think it compares to other federal consent decrees?
Well, here's the process. The Justice Department is negotiating with the city of Minneapolis to come up with a series of, language, policies, if you will, and they'll see if they can come to an agreement of what needs to take place to truly cause reform to be put in place. Then once they come to that agreement, that will be presented to a federal judge who will oversee the administering of that particular consent decree. So we're talking about a process that's months in the making, and that ideally, again, that's the key word, ideally, that will result in close monitoring of the police department and in a way that they can improve and make policing fair to everyone in the city.
Pierre Thomas, Mark Claxton, thank you, gentlemen.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.